Hi, I'm Frank and welcome to my woodturning channel. This week it's a nice cool fall day outside and I've got some black cherry under this tarp that I got maybe a couple of weeks ago. I've coated the ends, but now it's time to get it cut up and roughed out. So that's what we're going to do this week. Keeping the tarp on the wood really helps to prevent cracking. If you can't get at it for a week or two, that's the best thing I've found to just keep the wood stable. When I'm cutting up my larger bowl blanks, I really try to keep the pith out of the blank. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just cutting down the side, and the pith is going to be to the right of the saw. And that means in the blank, the pith will be not there, less chance of cracking. So I try to do that whenever I have large pieces. Rather than going to the bandsaw, I just chop the corners off with the chainsaw. If you've got a large lathe, that's all you really need to do. You can turn off the rest of it and just make it round on the lathe. Now that the pieces are in my garage, I'm just going to cover them up again. I can't get at them today, but so even just for a day, I will cover it just to minimize any chance of cracking. I'm always doing my roughing out with either a 5/8 inch gouge or 3/4 inch bull gouge. They all have swept back wings, and the angle that I have on the bevel is approximately somewhere between 50 and 55 degrees. You notice I have my shield and respirator on. The particles coming off the metal when you're grinding them are way more dangerous for your lungs than wood. So it's important to either have a mask on or have a respirator on. When I'm into production turning and roughing out lots of bowls, I've just found this technique works really well. I've taken an old faceplate and bolted some screws into it that are all pointy, and this works really well to grab the wood. Then I have just shoved this safe driver in there, and the safe driver is 7/8 inch diameter, and then all I have to do is drill a 7/8 inch diameter in my piece, and then I can fit it on. The spiky points help turn the piece, and I still have the ability to move the piece around to balance out the bark. Because I'm coring the piece, I'm going to put on as large of a tenon as possible. Now I'm just going to start the rough shaping. And you'll notice I'm turning left-handed, but sometimes I switch right-handed. If you do a lot of turning, you should really get to the point where you can turn equally well with either your left hand or right hand. And that's what I do. I turn equally well with either one. When I'm rough turning, I'm not really looking for a really smooth finish. I'm just trying to get the job done quickly. So you'll see a bunch of grooves and lines in the piece, but that's fine because it's going to warp and move anyway, and I have to redo it later once it's dry. I just have a small quantity of bowls to do now, but when I'm in production mode, I turn the bottoms or the backs of all the bowls first, set them aside, and then turn them around and then do the coring on all of those pieces. I always like to use the tailstock for support when I'm coring. And here, I'm not trying to get as many bowls as I can out of this. Basically, just the largest bowl and the next one down are the most important. These smaller bowls I find don't really sell for me, so I do core them out, but I just kind of set them aside, and sometimes I put them on draw tables for our local woodturning club. I'm using the Core Pro carbide cutter on my coring tool. I find it really does a great job. Carbide lasts a long time. And yeah, these are just great, made by Hunter Tools. And the overall coring rig, of course, is the Oneway coring rig, which I really like. I'm coring these bowls out to just over an inch thick. I use the general rule of 1 inch thickness for 10 inches of diameter, approximately, but I don't go quite that thick. So this largest bowl is probably 16 inches, and I would be just under a ½ inch, maybe 1 1/4 inches. These two larger bowls are my most important ones, so these are the ones I really want to keep. In this bowl, the wall thickness is concentric, but on the piece that's left here, you can see that it's thicker down near the bottom. So I always go back and make sure that for my roughed out piece, I try to make a relatively consistent thickness of wall all the way through the piece, from top to bottom. This just helps to make sure it dries more evenly and less chance of cracking. Then once the bowls are roughed out, I put end seal on the end grain, mainly just on the end grain. I don't put a lot on the side grain. I've never actually had a bowl crack on the side grain. If we develop any cracks, I find it's always on the end grain like this. I've moved away from a wax-based end sealer. Now I like to use a PVA-based end sealer. Sometimes I just use Elmer's glue, Elmer's white glue, and I water it down a little bit. Or you can buy the PVA-based end sealer from Craft Supplies in the US. Now I've moved the bowls over to my kiln. And this is just a low temperature kiln. It's just a big old freezer. And you can see it's not very full. Normally I have 30 or 40 bowls in here, but I don't have that much to fill it. So I've taken up the space with these just empty jugs. They just minimize the amount of space in there so that it's crowded more. And I just find you get the system just works better if it's relatively full in terms of taking all the humidity out of the wood. Now that little white device right there is just part of a weather station that I use to monitor the temperature and the humidity in the kiln. The kiln just works with some light bulbs, and then I have a fan here that goes on continuously, and then there's a temperature controller there. So just some light bulbs, temperature controller, and a fan. That's all I need to get the kiln to work. And the bowls are ready in 6 to 8 weeks versus 9 or 10 months. I forgot to mention that there's holes drilled in the bottom and top of the kiln to allow airflow, and you don't really need to use a temperature controller. You can just modulate it just with the amount of wattage you have in these incandescent bulbs. These are the temperatures that I use in the kiln, and then I just wait for the humidity to go down and stabilize.